Hello. In our last tutorial on how to make a hex-based board game in Unreal Engine, we got to the point where we do have some hex tiles generating as static meshes. So we have the foundation of what our board will look like. This is part two of that tutorial. If you haven't seen the first one, I'd recommend watching that just so you can follow along. But in today's video, as I mentioned, these are static meshes. We're actually going to make these spawn as actors when we begin play so that we can actually interact with the tiles, assign units to them, maybe the tiles have different characteristics, um, everything like that. So this kind of gives us a visual representation so we can see what it looks like. But now we'll actually get into the generation. And a couple things just to make sure that everybody's on the same page. I did bring in some of my own assets under tiles, my tiles. So I just brought in like my dunes, desert one, my mountains, etc. I made all of these in Blender. You can kind of see them over here. You don't need to make your own yet to follow along, but if you want to start generating some just different looking tiles, I have a farm, a keep, this is a mine, mountains, feel free to do so. The other thing in Blender, I guess while we're here quick too, is here's the tile we made in our last tutorial. And we made some materials, so main for this top one, top edge, and then this edge around the side. The one thing I want to make sure you guys have done is make sure this main is at the top. So if your main is down here, just use these arrows to bump it up and then re-export it as an FBX and come back into Unreal Engine. You can just hit re-import base mesh. The reason we do this is because we'll actually be changing this material, and it's just easiest if it's at the top. So when you're looking at the tile, we imported it in the last tutorial. Just make sure your main is on the top. You'll be good to go. The other things are we made this structure which controls this table, which generates in from our CSV. What you might want to think about is right now you might only have material and index, which is fine, but and you can continue to follow along just like that. But if you want to have some units and stuff, you might just add those in, and maybe just one as an integer for now. In my game, these will be the different units you can buy. So I have those all added in here, and then within my CSV, this would be the starting amount. And actually, I'm going to come back to Excel. When we start the game, these units will be on these tiles. So that's all I'm doing for me. You might be doing it different, so no need to actually do this if you don't want to, but to do it exactly like I'm doing, make sure your structure has these as integers. The other thing is this material is driven off the enumeration that we made in the last tutorial. I added some more different enumerations within here. So this is basically the type of tile that it is, and it'll set the material we're going to use. So you might not want a keep or a site or a mine or a farm, but for my game I do, so I have those in my enumeration. I like to also have an invalid just in case something gets kind of screwed up. That's at the top, and then I will just assign a funky material to it so I can see it. But yeah, if you're thinking you want some different terrain type tiles, add those into here, and we can set the material. The other thing is I made a enumeration called rand. This is for random. So the way I have it working and how I'll show you today is if your tile is set to rand, then it can be a random generated material and then have the corresponding effects of that tile. So for me, the random can be grasslands, forest, or desert. And then those might have different characteristics. So what I'm thinking is the forest might give a defense buff, the desert might give an offensive attack buff, and then the grass is neutral. So I just have rand, and I'll show you kind of what that looks like once we actually complete it. This is the project I'm actually working on, not the tutorial, but you can see right there's some desert, forest, grassland, and when we actually go into play, it changes. So let me see if I can kind of, let's get out of full screen, shrink this down. So you can see, right, like forest, forest, forest. This is forest, desert, forest. This is a forest here, it's grassland here. So just so every time you come into the game as the player, there could be some tiles that can set to just be randomly picked, just so there's some natural variability. So that's why I have this rand in my enumeration. So if you want something like that, I'd recommend just doing that. And then what's important within your CSV under your material is you need to make sure that if you have farm, rand, mountain, keep, whatever it is, this text is identical to what's in your enumeration. So no spelling errors, no extra spaces, anything like that, and then you'll be good to go. And then when you're done with that, you can just hit re-import. And as long as you don't have any errors, you're good. If you have some errors, you likely spelled something wrong. So like I have number of footmen or swordsmen in my CSV. Maybe I'll just do this quick. I'll just make this swordman instead of swordsman. And then I can kind of show you what happens. Okay, re-import, and it says I can't find this column. So to fix it, I just spelt it wrong, add that back in, resave it, and come back and re-import, and we're good to go. So that's how I'm setting mine up. So if you want to duplicate that, that's perfect. The other thing with your tile, so we brought this in as new tile. Just go ahead and just change this to tiled base or something like that. Just a generic kind of starter tile. And then feel free to re-import in any other tiles you might have. So I have this tile empty, which is kind of my default tile. Then I have dunes, farm, forest, rolling hills, everything like that. And yeah, so I think we should all be on the same page now. Let me close out of some of this. So what we're going to do is right now, as I mentioned, these are static meshes. We're doing this in our construction script of our tile grid manager. So our X grid, Y grid kind of set the overall area of the tiles, how many left and how many down. And then we have our spacing. And then we're actually adding in static mesh components and adding that to an array. But instead of doing static meshes, which is what these tiles are, we want to do actors. So they'll still have a static mesh for them, but they'll have actors so we can actually interact with them. So go back into your main folder, assets, and here is our grid manager. We're going to create a new class, and this will be an actor. And we will just call this BP HexTile. Go ahead and open that up. And so within here, we are going to add a static mesh component. So hit add component, static mesh. Or actually, I don't think we need the component. Yeah, just static mesh. And with this, set this to your kind of base tile. For me, I'm just going to use tile empty. But you can do whatever this tile is, this base or empty, set it to that. And for me, with my kind of base tile, I just assign this white color to it. So like I said, if there is an issue where it didn't grab the correct tile and the material, this will stand out to me as this is something wrong. A couple other things I did too. We'll import in some materials later, but there are some decent materials in the default starter pack. So I am using this concrete grime for the edges, and then on the top I'm using the rock basalt. So you can just kind of see this kind of looks kind of earthy, and this gives it, I don't know, a decent edge. And then just this basic for the top of the tile. So let's go back to our actor. So we have this mesh, and what we want to do in here is come into our event graph, and we're going to create a function. So right click, type in custom event, or create an event, not a function. And let's just call this starting settings. And we're going to add in some inputs. And this is if you want units to spawn when you begin the game. So make them all integers. And actually 5. And so for me, I'm going to have number footman, number spearman, number swordsman, number horseman, if I can spell, and number of knights. Okay. And then from here, we're going to make a variable. We're going to call this tile type. And this will be based off of our tile material enumeration. So switch this to tile material and compile and save. And so for me, it's defaulting to invalid, which is at the top of my enumeration. And I'm fine with that because we'll set this when we actually create it. But we will grab this. We'll come off this and we'll do switch on tile material and enumeration. And then click this little arrow and that'll give you all of them. And then what we'll do from here is we are going to grab our static mesh. I think I want to grab this one, yeah. And actually, let's just rename this to tile mesh. So tile mesh. And pull off this and hit set static mesh. And clean this up. Come here again and we'll do set material. Connect these two. And the other last thing I want to do, and this will make sense here in a bit, is grab this again. And we're going to do set world scale 3D. And I'm going to split this. So your scale is, is it being multiplied by a factor of 1, 2? So if I put 2 in for X and Y, I'm putting 1s, but if I put 2, it would double the size. What I'm going to do here is I'm going to pull off the Z. I'm going to do a rand float in range. Rand float in range. And I'm going to do 0.5 and 1.5. And you can change these on your side. I'll show you what this does though, is it just kind of adds a little bit of character to the tiles. So when we actually come into play mode, you can see like these mountains aren't exactly the same height. And that's because this one's probably getting a 1.5 multiplier to the z-axis, so height. And this one's a little bit lower. But you can see these trees are a little bit different. This tile's sticking up a little bit more. So it just kind of gives it a little bit more characteristic than just being completely flat. You don't need to do this. You can just ignore this entire part. But if you want to do that, that's how you do it. So after that, we're actually going to connect all of this to our enumerations. So for me, I guess let's start with the invalid. We'll grab this, and this will just be our tile empty. So tile empty or tile base, whatever you called it. And for the material, I'm just going to do this basic wall. It just gives it that white color, just so that if there is anything that is coming through as invalid, it'll just stand out to me. Next, let's do what you all probably have, is grass. So if it's assigned as grass, this will now be set to tile. For me, grass rolling hills. So this is something I made in Blender, but just these little bumps for hills. All of these are default in Unreal Engine, these materials, so you can just search grass and you can get this. So let's go back in. So set this to grass, and then for our material, I'm going to do grass. And for the scale, that's fine. And so you basically kind of rinse and repeat this for all of the different material enumerations you have. So for me, I'll do my forest next. Tile, forest, and I have my forest also just as a grass. I'll leave that. And grab our desert. Tile, I think I called this dunes. Yeah, dunes, and we'll set the material to sandstone. Oh, if I could spell, there we go. Yeah, so I'm going to go through and connect all these. I think you guys get the point. For every material you have in your enumeration, you then want a corresponding tile to that. So I have my tile dunes, my farm, my forest, my grass rolling hills, my keep, my mine, mountains. Again, if you're just going to kind of follow this tutorial with this base tile, that's completely fine. You can just skip ahead. I'm going to pause the video here for now and just finish cleaning all this up, and then I'll circle back. Okay, so I have all of these hooked up except for the random one, which I'll go through with you all just so we all have that. But setting the actual static mesh of the tile. And one thing I should clarify too, this material, this is what you want the top of the tile to be. So this. So with something where I actually have like a structure like this, I'm setting this part around it. Which I have right at the top. I call it grass here, but whatever's at the top is what's going to be set. And the way that works is we are setting the element index, the material index of 0. And that's what this is, right? The top is 0. So this is 0, 1, 2, 3. So I have all of my materials for the top of the tile set at the top, which is what I was trying to explain earlier. And so that will make this go correctly. So if you get down later and your materials are weird, it's probably a problem with how you're setting the material. So for the random, we're going to drag off this, come all the way down to the bottom. We're going to type switch on int. And for me, I have 3 possible outcomes. One would be the kind of grassland, one would be the desert, and one would be the forest. If you want more, or if you have different tiles, you can add more. If you just have 2 tiles for random, you can obviously just do less. Just right click, remove. And then the way we're going to do this is we're going to pull off this selection and do int rand int in range. And so this will be 0, 1, 2. So we're going to set a minimum of 0 and a maximum of 2. So it's randomly going to generate a number 0, 1, 2, and then it'll run off of the corresponding execution. And then how we'll do this is, let's see, let me just grab these. So here's my desert, dunes. Let's make that 0. Doesn't really matter which one you put where. Here's my forest. Let's copy this and put it here. And then lastly, I want to grab my grassland. This guy. And put that here. Boom. So what this will do, if you have a tile that is assigned as rand in your CSV, it's like for me, I have all of these as rand, it will come down to this side when we actually create it, and it'll appear as any of these materials and meshes. So, for me, obviously, I have, I made some little low poly trees, so that's what it'll look like. And I think that's all we need to do within the actual tile actor for now. We'll leave it open, but let's come back to our grid manager. So in the last video, we set up all this in our construction script, so we can look at this. But now what we're going to do is actually come into our event graph. So right now when we do hit play, actually let's do this quick. We'll do something different for this later, but come into your editor and in the top left, place actors, drag off this player start and just plop this somewhere on your map. So when we hit play, right, we can see this is still here, but again, these are static meshes, not actors, so we can't really interact with them at all. Oh, why did it do that? Okay. So what we want to do in our BP Grid Manager on the begin play, and let me flip over to this, is we're going to grab this array, HexTile static, which is what we were adding these meshes to when we're creating in our construction script here. And we're going to do a for each loop, connect this to our begin play. And we're going to pull off this and hit destroy component. So for each loop destroy. So now when we begin play, right, there's nothing there. And I know you're probably thinking, well, this seems really counterproductive. Why did we do all this work? Well, that's just so that you can actually visualize it while you're making it, because if we didn't do this, right, you have nothing here. So you have nothing to really visualize as you're actually making your maps. So that's why I do this. Let's back. So after this, on the to complete, or on the completed, drag off that and type in for loop. And actually, this is identical code, so we can come in and we can grab all of this. Let's see, I don't think we want, yeah. So just grab from the select vector and all of this stuff. Copy this, come into event graph, paste it, drag this down, clean it up a little bit. So on the completed, we're going to do a for loop off of our X grid. And then for each of those loops, we're going to do another for loop off of our Y grid, just like we did in the construction script. We're going to do all the same math with our spacing and offset, and then the select vector. But instead, what we're going to do off of this loop body, we're going to spawn an actor from class, and the spawn transform will come from our select vector, but we need to split this, and we can plug this location transform in. You can leave rotation and scale to 0. And oh, one more thing I want to do quick. Come back into your tile, your hex tile. Click on the tile type, and we're just going to do expose on spawn and instance editable. And you might get an error here. Refresh this. Okay, so our actor class, and class will be BP HexTile. And now we do have this. I'm going to leave this as invalid for me, but that's just to kind of catch any errors is why I have that. And then after this, so this is going to run a bunch of times, right? For how I have it set up, it's going to run 142 different times, so it's going to spawn that many tiles. And we want to add these into an array, so we have to create a new variable. We'll call this HexTiles actor, and we'll change the variable type to BP HexTile. And then click this little button right to the right, so we can make it an array. We'll compile, save. We'll drag this out and pull off this and hit add. And then connect this and this. Okay, so now what will happen is when we begin play, it'll clear all the static meshes we already have, and it will start to spawn all of our tiles. But these tiles are going to be spawned as the default invalid for now. So we actually have to make a function to set up their meshes. So come to here and hit new function. We'll call this set tiles actor. And come back to your event graph and drag this out. So on the completion of this second loop, we'll do this part of it. So connect this new function to here, and we can come back in here. And so what we're going to do in here, it's going to be pretty similar to this event, the set tile static mesh. And actually, we can come in here, and I think we can grab this. and this, copy it. So get table row names for each loop, and then get our table. We paste that in here. So now it's going to get all the rows of our table, which is the CSV. So all of these rows, and it'll do an event essentially for each of those rows, and then we'll get the data of that row. So now we can actually access some of the information in here. So we'll have our material enumeration and our units. So what we'll do after this is let's drag in our actor tile or a tile actor array. We're gonna pull off this search get. It'll be this get a copy. So when we spawned all these and added them into this array, they're coming in as 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, all the way to 142. So what we're going to link up within this array in our table is this row index. So this row index in our CSV is basically just kind of a count, right? But starting at 0, 1, 2, 3. This is going to correspond with exactly how these tiles are being added into that array variable. So this will get perfect information by tile from the CSV, which we keep here. And from this, I always like to do this check, is valid. You don't need to do it. We shouldn't have anything invalid, but it's just something I like to do. And then off of this, type in set tile type. So this is this variable that we set in here, tile type, which is the enumeration of all the different materials or tiles that we have. And if it is valid, come to here. And now we can drag off of our table, our material, and plug that in here. So this will now set the material enumeration within each of the actors that is spawning. And then the last thing we need to do, so again, we'll come off the get and type starting settings. And we can plug these in. So footmen, spearmen, swordsmen, horsemen, and knights, or whatever units you have. So this will start on our begin play. We'll spawn all of the actors, give them their location from this, add them to this array. And then when we're done with actually spawning all of them, get our data from the table and apply that table data to each of the individual actors. And we'll run this event within the tile actor, and it will switch off of the material type that we're setting right here. And it will actually then set the static mesh and the material. So in theory, this should work. Let's try it out. Okay, so it's spawned, but it's spawned really low. Why did that happen? Which I think I had to do this in my other project. Give me one sec. Yeah, I don't know why that happens, but what I did in my other project is I set the Z's for both of the selects within our event graph to 100. And yeah, there we go. So yours might look a little bit different because you might have different materials in a different table. But we now have tile spawning, and these are actors. So when we get a little bit later and start spawning in units, we can actually assign them to the tiles, move them to different tiles. Obviously, we'll get rid of this mannequin, and we won't have this walking around. We'll switch it over to a camera. But you should have something spawning now. So pretty cool. I think the other thing that's fun about it is I'm using the rand, which this isn't a good representation of the background, but you can see like 4 deserts next to the keep. If I come back in, right now it's 1 desert, some grassland, right, a bunch of trees over here. So yeah, it's being creative with a little bit of variability. The reason I did random without mountains and keeps and sites is because I don't want any player to get boxed in by the mountains. So I have those as, fixed, right? These are always going to be mountains. This will always be a keep, etc. But anything that is navigable will be random. And yeah, so I think we'll probably end the tutorial there. I think what we'll do next time is we'll set up the camera so we can actually move around. And then I think we'll get into some of the player stuff. So player spawns and changing turns. And then after that, we'll get into actually spawning units. So hope this was helpful. Leave comments if you have questions, need help with something, or if you want to see other tutorials. I'm going to finish this one through, obviously, but I'm working on a third-person action RPG as well. So if you have questions about anything Unreal Engine related, just let me know, and I'd be happy to do a tutorial on it. Thanks.